Hello, and welcome to Madness of the Lesser Light. I am your host, Mike Luna. In this episode, I'll be reading a piece entitled
Carpentry of the Mind. Demolition, renovation, and remodeling are the three forms of carpentry. A religion started on the island of Boyce. Never heard of it? Wait, the island or the religion? Or both? Well, it all started back in the year 2162, and... Oh, right, that hasn't happened yet, has it? Well, spoilers ahead then. I won't tell you who won the previous election, since I don't want to offend anybody, but basically the world as it was known back then survived. So, don't worry about it. Knowledge increased, scientists made advancements in medicine and technology, and we ended up colonizing and terraforming Mars. Terraforming is basically a fancy word for make like Earth. So we pretty much just gave it an atmosphere by planting trees and plants, etc. Took a while, but we had breathable air, so folks started vacationing there using our light-speed transit system centered in Boston, Massachusetts, and developed by the folks at MIT. I mean, yeah, it still took an hour and a half to get to Mars for your morning commute, but the trip back doesn't seem nearly as long after you've spent all day in the plutonium mines and you're exhausted by the end of the day. Oh yeah, that's right, the plutonium. That's what started the three forms of carpentry. See, the big project the Mars government had going on back in 2153 was that we wanted to go to Jupiter to make it great again or something. Yeah, there was some guy, an amateur comedian back in 2028 who had tried running the coattails of one of our previous presidents and ended up running as a joke in 2024 with his "We're going to Mars" slogan before making a second attempt 4 years later with his slogan changed to "Make Jupiter Great Again." He didn't win either time, of course, but one of the Martian politicians, time out for a sec. No, he wasn't a little green guy or anything like that. He was an Earthling, a human being like the rest of us. Sorry, we didn't find alien life on Mars. Jupiter, on the other hand, that's what the project was about. See, this guy named Lance Cooper III, the descendant of our 49th president, he wanted to send some colonizers left over from the Martian excursion. Again, fancy word for, hey, let's fly people from Earth to Mars, plant a flag, and start planting stuff so people can breathe without suits and helmets. Anyway, Lance wanted to take a few of us to Jupiter with him and his family's personal cruise liner just to check things out, Make sure there weren't any aliens there, besides us, of course. Yeah, see, when we got to Mars, we pretty much gave in to the idea that, yep, we're all aliens since we're all from somewhere else, so that's what sparked the idea of the carpentry of the mind, how to demolish, renovate, and remodel your worldview, a guide for wise guys by Edward G. Fall, former mobster from Brooklyn who had left his life of organized crime in order to write self-help books. In the preface, he briefly mentions his formative years, saying, "I'll admit it, I was involved with a rather insidious group of goons, your typical, hey, let's take this guy down to the docks, try on a nice pair of cement shoes, and sleep with the fishes kind of crowd. And I'll even go on record and confess that I was personally involved in ensuring the untimely demise of many a corrupt congressman as a result of what we in the business refer to as an unfortunate accident. But I've left those days behind me." Indeed he had. Eddie Fall, as he was known by his buddies in the Jupiter excursion team, or JET, haha, see what I did there? Eddie had written that book, well, okay, it started off as a poem, but a publishing house on Mars offered him a book deal and he went for it, so either way, Eddie read it to the rest of us on our way to Jupiter. It was 30 chapters. The trip took us 1 month, and we got through a chapter a day. By the end, or perhaps I should say by the beginning of our first landing on the grassy plains of Jupiter, we all felt enlightened, especially because the place was so dark. Sure, we didn't need our suits or helmets to breathe, but there were ominous storm clouds up above us, all over, all the time. Of course, the storm clouds around Jupiter weren't really clouds at all. It turns out they weren't even a natural weather occurrence on the king planet either. You know what they were? A force field. Yep, all this time the natives of Jupiter knew about us Earthlings and our propensity to respond to a slap on the right cheek by punching back twice as hard with a left hook, and they were not happy to see us waltzing into their utopia. No, not one bit. In fact, several of the orange humanoid aliens garbed in green robes and brandishing silver tridents, their prongs sparkling with blue voltage, aimed their weapons at Earth's perceived invasion force, taking us aboard a wooden boat pulled by a giant aquatic unicorn and across the Emerald Sea to the island of Boyce, to their capital, specifically to see their emperor. Now, their terminology, as we had expected from the non-existent Martians, led to a bit of confusion. Yes, these orange humanoid creatures spoke English, but they didn't call it that, obviously, and yes, they had an emperor, but he wasn't an autocratic, tyrannical dictator as the word in this interstellar context might suggest. In fact, they explained to us in Jupiterian, yes, like humanity, they seemed to lack imagination when it came to naming things, but unlike us, they didn't break people, as they called themselves, into groups based on what part of Jupiter they hailed from. Apparently, this emperor, living on the island of Boyce in the capital, which turned out to be a village, not a city, sat around a campfire with other members of his species, and not on a throne in a castle on top of a mountain lording over them. He was less of a ruler and more like a guru for these people. The oldest one of them, actually, and since, unlike us, the Jupiter people never die from natural causes, the emperor of the king planet had accrued a great deal of knowledge about his and our world as well, and wisdom to share it with others, explaining the difference when Eddie, his long repressed smartass ways resurfacing, posed the question to the aged orange humanoid. The emperor smiled and replied, "Knowledge is information. Wisdom is knowing how to use it." We all started getting a C.S. Lewis out of the silent planet vibe from this guy, especially when he asked us Earthlings a childish, albeit pointed follow-up question in response to Eddie's impulsive query. If you determine goodness by emotion, good is good because it feels good, and bad is bad because it feels bad. And considering the ripple effect of each thought, word, and deed, tell me, Earthlings, is you feeling good worth someone else feeling bad? At this point, the Jupiter excursion team fell into disarray. Half of us disagreed with the emperor of the king planet, and the other half, including Eddie, who began frantically quoting his own words with his self-help book, agreed with the alien wholeheartedly. I honestly don't remember which side I was on, but the one person of notoriety on the con side of the argument was Lance Cooper III, who may have had as much charisma as JFK, Barack Obama, and Teddy Roosevelt combined, but now displayed a level of malice and hatred for his fellow man that rivaled that of Adolf Hitler. This surprised us, since Lance III was the great-great-grandson of the guy who, during the primaries nearly a century and a half ago, had verbally thrashed and reprimanded that amateur comedian who had not only run as a joke, but who, now that I recall, also wanted to have Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra as his administration's theme song if, by some divine contrivance, he had somehow won the presidency. Sure, the first verse of that song mentions Jupiter and Mars, specifically wanting to see what spring is like on those two planets, one of which we'd eventually colonize and terraform a few decades later. But for folks on Earth in 2024 and 2028, the prospects of space travel never mind mining for plutonium to serve as lightspeed jet fuel, sounded absolutely insane. It's no wonder that comedian eventually got sent back to McLean Hospital in Belmont where he belonged. Regardless, here we were, in the capital of the King Planet, having a battle of verbal fisticuffs over whether what the orange alien leader of Jupiter's natives said was apt or not. The person who broke the tie, inspiring Eddie to spread the gospel of the 3 forms of carpentry once Jet returned to Mars, with the bad news that we had wasted 2 months going to Jupiter and back, wasn't one of us, but instead a little Jupiter native named Pollyanna, who approached the former mobster from Brooklyn, turned author, who had begun to regress into his old irritable self, and tugged on his left pant leg to get his attention. While the rest of us continued to spew vitriol at one another, Eddie crouched down to get eye level with her, before the tiny orange humanoid alien girl kissed him on the cheek and then ran off to play with her friends. The rest of us all saw the gesture, and we all stopped arguing then and there. We seemed to come to the same conclusion, albeit through a childish medium. Demolition, renovation, and remodeling doesn't need to be done with a hammer, nails, and a screwdriver, a saw, or a nice pair of cement shoes, and certainly not with a left hook to somebody's jaw. Cheesy as it sounds, love indeed conquered all that day, and Eddie Fall and Lance Cooper III, both of whom had wanted to kill one another a moment ago, shook hands and hugged like brothers. A former mobster and the heir to a political dynasty spread the 3 forms of carpentry across Mars upon Jet's return, and every so often the Martian government gets letters from the Emperor of the King Planet containing a single sentence with 4 words. How you doing, kids?
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. See you later.